In this video, I'll share 7 prepper lessons I learned while living in Afghanistan, especially lessons that apply to the term SHTF. Hey YouTube, welcome to City Prepping, where we discuss emergency preparedness, self-sustainability, and prepping. If you're new to this channel, please consider subscribing. One of the videos that I did a couple of years ago was 7 prepper lessons I learned while living in Afghanistan. And it's a video that's racked up a lot of views. And so what I want to do in this video is take a bit of a deeper dive and talk about some of those things that I learned firsthand. And before I jump into the 7 points, let me say this. Again, I do read comments on my videos, and one of the things that often surprises me is how oftentimes people will make comments along the lines of, hey, I wish SHTF did happen. I wish, there was a great reset in our country. Other things that are in line with kind of a thinking, or at least when I'm reading the comments, it appears as if people, almost wish for SHTF to happen. But there's this thinking that, hey, if I can get out of this current situation I'm in, maybe things will be better. And let me assure you, again, it's a term that we throw around so much in the prepper community that living in a true SHTF environment, Afghanistan is about as SHTF as you can get. It's an environment that's completely destroyed. It's been a ransack after war and fighting and internal fighting within its own country. And I saw a lot of things firsthand. And I bring this point up because I want to make sure people understand that living in an environment like this, it's horrible. And that's one of the first points, and really the first one I want to talk about in this video is SHTF, real SHTF, it's horrible and it's going to suck. And what do I mean by that? One of the things that, first of all, I think really impressed me when I hit the ground, or rather was an impression that was made upon me, is people had obviously nothing. They were just trying to survive day to day. And people with disabilities, or if you were sick or you got ill, you just wouldn't make it. A lot of our team was comprised of physicians. And I remember driving around town and asking one of the doctors in our group, why don't you see people, because you would see people lined up everywhere on the curbs and begging. And I would ask, hey, why don't you see people with Down syndrome or birth defects and stuff like that? And one of the things that physicians on our team pointed out to me is that, hey, in an environment like this, if you're weak or you're ill, and I mean physically weak, or have an illness, you're probably not going to survive very long. It's kind of a survival of the fittest environment. And so, when I hear a lot of times people make comments that, hey, almost in a sense looking forward to SHTF as, things would be better on the other side, I can assure you that the life that these people lived, it was really tough. Every day just doing basic things like getting water. We had to pump that out of a well. Electricity. There was no centralized electricity there. We had to run our own generators, which presented a lot of challenges in and of itself. And day-to-day life was very difficult. I think the average income in the country, at least the time that I was there, is about 530 USD. That's an annual income for somebody living there. Things were really tough. People had to learn how to scavenge, and death was just kind of a common way for a lot of people. I heard a lot of stories listening and sitting and talking to people where they would share experiences with watching family members getting killed, different people getting an illness and just not making it. And so you could listen as you get to know people in the culture more and more, you would hear these stories of how difficult life really was. And I bring this up as a first point because, again, I know this is not representative of all the prepper community, but I do a lot of times hear that statement that, hey, I almost welcome SHTF. I read the comments section, again, in a lot of my videos. It's a thinking and an attitude that I hear sometimes, and I don't think people realize what that would actually look like if our culture and our society really slipped into a situation that was truly that bad. Point number 2 would be losing the ability to control your own life and your own future. What do I mean by that? Well, while living there, if you know the history of Afghanistan or Russia came in, they tried to basically dominate the country. They left in the late 80s. The people that lived there were experiencing obviously a lot of difficulty through the time of war when the Russians were occupying them. After the Russians left, there was a power vacuum that ensued with a lot of the individuals within, the warlords within the country beginning to fight for power. And what ended up happening was you have this huge power vacuum that was left. The warlords stepped in, and there was then control asserted over the people based on whatever region you lived in. Why is that important? I'm basing some of this video on some of the things I've listened to over the years as I've got to know the prepper community better and better through the comments section. A lot of times I do hear this attitude of, hey, I've got firearms, I've got ammunition, I'll be able to take care of myself. Well, imagine, yeah, you might be able to do that within your own small acreage. But if you were surrounded by a particular warlord, again, using this phrasing, warlord in your environment, maybe in your state, your region, that has control over what happens to you and your family, you lose control. You have no ability to dictate what's going to happen in your own future. Why is that important, especially when it comes to prepping? I bring this up because a lot of times, again, there's this isolationist mentality that I hear. People think, hey, I'll be able to make it on my own. I can do things my way. You don't really have that option, especially if you've got a warlord or you've got some kind of territorial leader in your region that's defining how you're going to live. What do I mean by this? I mean, if you've ever seen the TV show The Walking Dead, in the show you have, the different leaders, bad guys, so to speak. You have the governor who comes in and tries to, overrun Rick and his group. And later you have Negan. And, you see in those episodes how much of an impact an individual can have that has, people following him, how much he can have over your group or your region, even though you may not be wanting to submit to him or her. And I bring this up again simply because one of the things that we afford and a luxury we have in this country is democracy. You don't get that when you live in an environment where control is lost, and the people that do take control, you didn't vote them in. You didn't have a say in who they are. They just happen to take over your region. And so it's something to consider. It's a lot of times, again, the thinking is, hey, I'll go out on my own, I'll do my own things, I've got my firearms, and it unfortunately just doesn't work that way. Point number 3 is security is now your responsibility. While living there, you would be hard-pressed to find a building or see a structure that was still standing vertically that didn't have some kind of bullet holes, RPG holes, or some evidence of destruction had been rained down upon that building or that area that you were in. Again, kind of tying into the point before where, talking about in the prepper community, we talk about firearms. We talk about, hey, I've got my own security lined up. And if you've got an army or a surrounding group around you that is dictating, and fighting or dictating control over your area, fighting for your area, security is going to be a hard thing for you to take care of on your own. I'm not sure if you've ever read the book before, the 1 Second After, great book. But in the book, it talks about this particular issue where essentially there's a large group of marauders that come into the main, protagonist in the book and his community. They come in and they begin to sweep through his community to try to destroy it. And I say that because security, fighting, your life being in jeopardy, that potential, it becomes a daily way of living. I had to listen to so many stories from individuals in the community. Again, I talked about this a second ago that had to watch family members die, had to see real infighting happen on a daily basis, and this kind of became a way of life for them. And it was obviously something that was very traumatic and it was very horrible. In saying that, that kind of segues me to point number 4, which is a shorter lifespan. When I was there in 2003, the average lifespan was, according to the UN, was 56.2 years. It was extremely small. Since that time has gone up as the fighting has gone down. But in that environment, you were lucky to live for an extended period of time. Again, whether it's malnutrition, whether it's disease, whether it's, a lack of sanitation, a lack of being able to get to medical treatment, not knowing whether you were going to get shot or killed that day just because, again, you were in a bad area or, whatever group of insurgents decided to come through your area and clean people out, the lifespan went down severely. For a lot of us that are prepared, that will have the proper supplies, training, etc., we may be able to go the distance. We may be able to go longer than the typical person. But again, what I saw living in an environment like this is there's only so far you can go. You can't cheat death forever. And a lot of these people, they're, the people that I saw living in Afghanistan, they were very weathered individuals. They were very hardened. But yet it was interesting when you met people, a lot of times they may look extremely old and you would start asking them basic questions about their age. And I was surprised sometimes that they weren't much older than me, but they looked easily double our age. Point number 5, and one of the things that I observed while living there was a lack of education, or rather a lack of access to education. What do I mean by that? Well, first of all, the Taliban, when they went through, they cleaned out, the libraries, they cleaned out just all the sources of information. My degree was in microbiology. And when I went into the university there at Kabul, I was trying to help the science department do whatever I could to help teach. And I asked them, hey, do you have a library? Do you have books? And they took me into their quote-unquote library. And it was nothing more than just an empty room. I mean, the Taliban had pretty much eradicated it. The reason being is because they knew if they could take information and education away from people, they could enslave them. Information is power. Anytime you take away people's ability to gain information, to get access to information, you can begin to then assert power over them. Obviously, we're seeing this in countries like China and how they're regulating the internet. And I saw this firsthand in Afghanistan. The people there were really reliant upon whoever was in charge or whoever was, the current warlord or, power that was over them. And it was really difficult for them to get access to information. If you haven't done so already, there's a lot of great websites, especially websites within the prepper community. If you just simply Google prepper PDF downloads, there's a lot of useful information that you can download to either a thumb drive or some source of backup, on a hard drive. I would encourage you to do so if you haven't. When things go sideways, if things really get so bad that we've lost internet, that we've lost the ability to get information, having either physical hard copy books, number one, would be ideal, and having backup PDFs, I think, are going to be just as equally important. Having access to information. Point number 6 is the impact that it had on women. What I saw and I observed firsthand was that if you were a woman, you were in a really bad position. I've seen photos from I think the 70s, early 70s, late 60s of Afghanistan, and it looked just like pretty much what you would see in America. Women, the hair the same, the outfits the same. They were able to just, walk around freely on the campuses. I've seen these pictures when I was there. They showed me. It was really interesting. And then you compare that to what is, at least when I was there, and pretty much what it is now, where, women are kept in check. They have to wear the burqa. They are really looked down upon almost as a lesser than individual. It's a very patriarchal society, obviously. And one of the things that I saw there firsthand is women had to work twice as hard. They were treated as a second-class citizen. I bring this up because, again, it was an eye-opener. Let's just put it this way. I've read a lot of things about countries in that area and how women are treated, but seeing it firsthand was a different thing. One of the things I did observe, though, was I taught English at Kabul University. I helped teach English. I did a lot of things at Kabul University with our team. And I noticed that the women were the ones that were always the most eager to learn, in the classroom setting especially, because a lot of times the men were given, diplomas or whatever, and they did nothing. But the women were always the ones that were fighting the hardest. They were the most eager to learn, let's just put it this way, because they really wanted to move ahead in life. And so, not sure how that information that I'm sharing on this point is necessarily something that you could say and digest and say, hey, yeah, that's something I could use or practically implement. But it is something I observed nonetheless. And it was an eye-opener, I'll put it that way. Point number 7 would be in relation to community. Again, I kind of talked about this briefly earlier in the video, is that a lot of times there's this mentality of, hey, I'll go it on my own. I'll be a lone wolf. I can take care of myself. And one of the things that I observed is for the people that were able to make it long-term, the people of communities that came together, they were able to take care of each other. And I say all that because, yeah, if you go it on your own, maybe you're a lone wolf, you might be able to make it 6 months, a year, maybe a year and a half, who knows, maybe even for longer. But there comes a point, the typical individual is only going to make it so far. But one of the things I observed was everybody pretty much had compounds, families were within houses. And if you haven't ever done this or connected with any other preppers in your community, I encourage you to do so. Even if they're individuals that don't even consider themselves preppers, but building those relationships with individuals that maybe have skill sets you don't, whether that's medical, military, gardening, you can go down the list. And it's good to have those relational aspects already set up, because I noticed, again, the individuals that thrive were those that had that community dynamic. So the last point I'll bring up is, what was I doing in Afghanistan? I was there, again, in 2003. I was working with a NGO, and again, that just means non-governmental organization. It was a team of physicians, most of them were physicians. And at the time, it was a nonprofit. These were individuals that simply wanted to go in and help. Back when I was younger, in college especially, I used to do a lot of humanitarian work. I used to go down to Mexico. If you've never gone out and traveled and lived outside of your own region or country or spending time outside, it's an eye-opener. There's a lot you can learn, and it helps expand your view and your horizon. It's a subject or video that I probably would love to do one day on my own channel, discussing, what would you do? Would you help when you can? I know a lot of times we discuss the concept of OPSEC and how critical that is, but having a level of compassion to help people, again, it's a lot of times seen as a weakness within the community. But I think getting back to one of the last points I hit on was community. If you're going to build long term, you're not going to be an island to yourself. You've got to learn how to get outside of yourself, help other people, and hope they reciprocate that back. So that's a video in a wrap. I've been wanting to do this kind of a part 2, going into a little more of a deep dive, so to speak, of some of the points of why I was there and what I learned. And again, I appreciate the comments that I did get on the other video, that a lot of times people would share and point out, hey, experience is something that you'll have forever. It's something that you can't just read about. But once you experience it and practically go through it, it's a totally different, it's a different experience, a different type of knowing and learning. And I can say without a shadow of a doubt, yeah, I've lived in SHTF. I've seen it. I was fortunate to know that at the end of the, a 3-month period, I was going to be out. So there was that sense of hope. But I've seen what it can be like to actually live in it. And getting back to point 1, it sucks. It really does. And I hope that this nation never goes to the level of depravity and the war and so on that I saw there firsthand. If you have any comments, questions, post those below in the comment section. As always, be safe out there.